I've got a story about a friend of mine that's touched a lot of people. I met this lady when I was living in Fort St. John. Her daughter had phoned her. She was living in Langley in her home. And her daughter and son-in-law, and they had 5 kids, were living on a farm about half an hour outside of Fort St. John. And they were going to lose the farm. The bank had called the loan on it. And her grandchildren and her daughter and son-in-law were going to wind up being out in the street. So she didn't even really think about what she was doing. She just knew they needed help. So she agreed to give them the money. And the only way she could give them the money was to sell her home. So they told her that they would put the farm in her name and that they would build her a suite on the farm so she could live there. They signed the property over to her and she gave them the money for her house. But they never did get around for many years of putting a suite on the farm. So she was living in a little apartment in Fort St. John, basically on the old age pension because she had no other money. And this went on for a number of years. And then finally they did actually build a lovely suite on the farm for her. He was a wonderful carpenter and a farmer, but his carpentry was not doing well. He did really specialized, very fancy work, and half an hour out of Fort St. John there really wasn't much of a market, and it wasn't doing well either. And then one day he came storming in and suggested that she was there now, she had her home, he had built the place like he said he would, and she should now sign the farm back to him. And he had never made one payment even. So she still would have nothing. So she thought about this and decided she wasn't going to make a decision right away. When she had given them the money, she didn't pray, she just reacted to their need. So she thought this time she was going to pray. So she took a couple of days and just read and studied and prayed, and the answer came no. That God loves every one of his children equally, and he would never take from one to give to another. So the right answer had to be right for everybody, because if it was not good for somebody, then in the long run it wasn't good for anybody. So she thought about this for a while, and so then she just marched up to this very angry, very forceful man, and now she's in her mid-80s, and simply said, no, I am not going to sign the farm back to you. As a matter of fact, I am going to sell it, and I'm going to take my money back, and we will split the rest how we feel it's reasonable. And he flew into an absolute rage, and there was quite a lot of anger, and he packed his bags and left and moved just outside of Edmonton. And she didn't drive, and so she was basically stranded. So she had to deal with the real estate and the auctioneers and the legal business. But she managed, and the daughter and son-in-law would have nothing to do with her, and they wouldn't talk with her. And so it was not really a very happy situation for some time. It took about 2 years, and in this time the son-in-law had his carpentry business in Edmonton, or just outside of Edmonton, where there was a huger market, and his beautiful work then had a great opportunity, and his business just boomed. And so he was doing really well. And so the relationship got back together, and it was very wonderful. He actually looked after her in her later years and built things for her, helped her out, drove her around, did all sorts of things. And she always thought that just taking the imposition off of him, because he knew that he had taken everything she had and he had no way of repaying it, was also making him more miserable and angry. So, she felt by standing up to him, making things right, it also released him. She was so grounded with her idea that God would never take from one of her children to give to another, that there was no winners or losers, that if it was right, everybody had to win. And so this was her idea that this was not a good situation for her, so in the long run it couldn't be good for him. So her most loving action was to stand up to him. And she would never allow anyone to feel that there was a problem. She always said that that's an opportunity. Find the opportunity and go with it.